So hey guys, I got asked to be part of a collaboration series. Go for Green Living is, I think this is the second one he's done now, or they've done. And basically, the way this works is they kick the thing off asking a question to another YouTube channel. They have a day to respond to that question, and then have a question for a channel that will follow them. There's a handful of channels that have already been defined sort of in the collaboration, who will be in there. And then eventually it ends back up on Go for Green Living, answering whatever question that they're presented. They did one other one on this, a lot of great channels involved in it, very interesting topics, and really kind of got the mind flowing and going on just different ideas and perspectives, hearing other people's challenges and stuff like that. So with that, this series is called What If? And that could be a whole string of stuff. What if the grid went down? What if the economy collapsed? You know, and it doesn't have to be something negative. What if you inherited $1 million? What if aliens show up at your door? How would you guys respond to that, or adjust for it? Or what do you think would be some of your challenges? So far, everyone that's been in, of course, Go for Green Living kicked off the original question. Dirt Patch Heaven then responded, kicked off a question to BigBear Homestead. And BigBear Homestead is the one that has sent the question down to us. So I encourage you to go back and check out all the other channels so far that have partaken in this, if this is something you're interested in. And the question that BigBear Homestead threw at us is, what happens if you woke up tomorrow and found parachutes all in the sky, basically another country dropping in to invade, similar to like the movie like Red Dawn. If you're not familiar with Red Dawn, it was like a movie in the 80s. Basically Russia invading, and then they did a remake of it, I think a year or two ago. I know they were on Netflix at one point because I did watch them. So how are we going to respond to that type of question? Let's get into it. So I just give you a real quick brief background on us. We've never really been the prepping type, or that's something that hasn't really driven us. I think living your life in fear is a very crippling thing. And it's something we try to avoid. The big driving factor for us on changing our lifestyle, moving out of the big city into small town living, was to live a slower pace of life. We're kind of looking for that Andy Griffin small town living lifestyle, I guess. And with that, things have really changed quite a bit living out here. You know, at one point I envisioned having a four-wheeler track out here and racing around, and now at this point right now I envision seeing cattle out there at some point, but every year it's a little bit of a step forward to becoming a little bit more self-sufficient. All right, so like I mentioned, BigBear Homestead threw out the question, what if we woke up one morning with parachutes and another country basically dropping in and invading our country, Red Dawn style? How would we handle that? Boy, does this open up a lot of like what ifs out of this conversation, a lot of play it by ear type situation. And I think the first thing we maybe should talk about is just mindset. I'm a guy that I don't have a military background. I tried very, very hard to get into every single branch. I'd have a very different lifestyle if I think that would have happened. But they didn't want to touch me. I have a medical condition that they didn't want to deal with, something we won't talk about today, but maybe at some future time. But I've always wondered that myself. How would I do mentally in a situation like that? You get in a real high stress situation, you get some guys that they just want to curl up in a ball and just pretend it's not happening. And you got other people that just really come to the occasion and clear-minded and figure out how to get stuff done. I think a lot of that comes back to training. Like I said, I'm a guy that doesn't have a lot of training in that area. I've definitely been in my fair fist fights in my lifetime, but never in a gun battle type situation or something like that. So, and with that, I think that there's a whole nother thing that kind of comes, how does this whole thing start off? You know, someone could land in the back end of our property. I could come out in the deck and be like checking out and figuring out what's going on, and they could take a shot at me. Well, now it's like, okay, this is a life or death type of situation. But let's say they came landing in and they came knocking on our doorstep. You know, I'm not going to go answer the door with a gun on my hip saying, you know, what's going on? Also, here we are now a prisoner, or our lives are ended, or something real negative like that. So I think a lot comes to that, you know, a little bit of that disbelief and the point of realization of when something is going south like that. And Red Dawn, they kind of like, they just dropped in and started shooting. So it was pretty blatant, obvious that it was wartime. So the next question that would come into my mind or thought would be, do we stay put, secure up the place, or are we trying to make some sort of bug out plan of some sort? I think the smartest thing for us with our setup would probably be to try to secure a location. You know, we got all these fields all around us. hence the name Life in Farmland. We live out in farmland. Most of the fields around here are hay, soybean, or corn. A lot of times farmers will plant soy 2 years because beans put nitrogen back in the soil, and then they'll do 1 year corn because corn is a very heavy nitrogen consuming crop. So last year they had corn in there. So this year and next year would be soybean in that one field that's somewhat visible within our eyesight besides the hay field. I think corn could be something that they could potentially hide in as they made their approach towards us. But most of those are still several 100 feet or 100 yards away from us. The big hiding points for us would probably be our wood piles. Someone could easily hide behind that, or over by our garden in our corn or soybean. But still, they have several 100 feet run to the house, so that would put them out in the open if they're looking to take over our property. I do see a couple pieces of things I'd like to adjust, I guess, on our house. We have a big glass sliding door, which gives us a lot of visibility, but also opens this up quite a bit too. I'd probably, if I could, make a run to the pole barn, grab some of the sheets of plywood that I have out there and try to close that up somewhat, but not so much that I couldn't see out of it. And we have a split entry house. Most of our stuff is, all our main entrance doors are all, there's not glass or anything like that where they could just knock things out and come right in. But we do have a vulnerability with the lower level and some of the windows down there. I'd try to get those secured up as well. So, boy, for the bug out side of stuff, that gets a little tricky too. You think about wars, they generally last several years, and us living in Minnesota, winters can get pretty brutal. So do we want to even bug out and run the risk of potentially having to sort of survive out there a little bit? I've done camping in the winter months, and even with the right gear, it's not always the most fun thing to do. And if you had to spend all your time out there like that over a winter, it could be pretty rough. So that's part of the reason I think I'm leaning towards like try to secure things up. But if we did have to bug out, a lot of these fields should all have like tree lines that run along them. Some of them are pretty thick. We have some state forests and stuff that run along some of these fields here. And then we also have some thinner ones. Ours isn't like super thick, maybe a couple 100 feet. So we have cover that we could hide in or travel before. We made a break from our house out to the tree line, took off, and we could travel for I think several miles without ever giving up our cover. But yeah, that really opens up a lot there. We could find even like a cornfield to hide out. If it was a temporary thing, we could hide out in a cornfield. Some of the fields out here have like streams that run through that they use for watering those fields. I definitely want something to purify that water. And even field corn. I don't know if any of you guys have ever eaten field corn before, like you eat it earlier in the season before it starts to harden up and dry. It's not that different than like sweet corn or something, but it's definitely not sweet corn, but it's definitely edible. I've definitely eaten it before. So that's a food source that we could potentially hunker down. But then that opens up another question: who controls that airspace? Anyone with decent sized government or military, my guess is they have some sort of infrared heat type of device, and if they control the airspace, they could easily fly over and find you. If they didn't, it might be a little easier. You could do like a Dakota fire pit or something like that. If you're not familiar with what those are, they're kind of like a U-shaped type of fire pit that you dig into the ground, so it keeps all your flame in there, and it sort of sucks air in and pulls out the other side, and you have an easy platform. Go back and look at like my, 1,000 subscriber giveaway. I did one of those. I did a little bow and drill fire. If you're curious on what that looks like, I think I cooked some tea or I made a cup of tea or something over it. That's something I would definitely try to utilize if infrared wasn't a big thing. But boy, it's a tough thing, and it's so easy to find so many things that are up against you. I think it's a little bit of a game of luck, a little bit of smart planning, combined with luck, I guess, in some ways. If you catch stuff early enough, you can take some preventative action, maybe go out and get some plywood to help secure things up, and sit your family in a safe location to try to protect everyone. Same time, you got to ask yourself too, why are they landing in your area? Are they all congregating and building up their forces to go in and invade cities? I know if it was me, I'd want to try to take a jab at them and knock them down as much as I could. Stand up. You know, that was one thing my dad told me as a kid. You know, you don't start the fight, but you finish it. And I don't think I'd be able to finish that fight, but I would sure hope I could put a little bit of hurt in them. So, you know, I don't know. At the same time, I got my family to look after as well. So there's a lot that goes into this. Yeah. So I don't mean to make this all Debbie Downer or something. You know, this is a big part of the reason we don't live our lives by like a prepping lifestyle, because there's so many things, you know, so many what ifs. You know, the grid goes down, the economy collapses. There's just so many things that you could spend your life worrying about. I mean, I've even seen stuff where they talk about like the earth shifting, and you know, now suddenly the areas that are hot or cold and vice versa. I mean, you could just drive yourself crazy with some of these what ifs. So that's just a little bit of the mindset that I'm thinking I'd be in, or just some of the thought process that would be going through my head during that process. I think a lot of it comes down to a little bit of luck. Some of it comes down to adjusting to the situation, and some of it comes down to how well you prepare for something like that, and kind of what time and when it happens. Oh boy. So the next thing we gotta do is gotta get a question off to Off Grid Doug and Stacy. They're next in the collaboration series. If you're not very familiar with them, they live off grid, no solar or anything like that. I really like them a lot. I think they're a great team. They're pretty fun to watch spin off each other. Stacy's so knowledgeable in food and how to utilize some of that stuff. And then Doug, I mean, he's a guy that's had his hands in a lot of stuff. And lived a whole different wide variety of lifestyles in his lifetime. I think he's a pretty well-rounded guy. With that, they've put a lot of thought and processing into their property, you know, what assets are on that property and their location of the property to help limit some of the risks of some of that stuff. I think that's a little bit more of a driving factor for them. I think they are pretty well set up, but there's definitely things in life that you can't prepare for. So we'll throw one of those type of questions at them. Everyone's day comes at some point, so my question for them is, what happens if something happened to one or the other of them? Would the other one stay there? So if something happened to Doug, would Stacy stay there? Or if something happened to Stacy, would Doug continue to, you know, live that lifestyle? So I look forward to hearing what they have to say. Like I mentioned, if you haven't checked them out, they're next in the collaboration lineup. A lot of other great channels, and a lot of great channels have already come through the pipeline with this. BigBear Homestead, Dirt Patch Heaven, and Go for Green Living kind of kicked it off. Although Go for Green Living sort of finishes. They just asked the very first question. So I encourage you to go check them out. So hopefully this video hasn't gone too long. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.